On this podcast, if it comes down to behavioral economics, behavioral finance, something to do with behavior, something to do with psychology, I'm usually always going to go there because the psychological side, our mind, human nature is so connected to my trading world. So even if the subject is slightly different, like it is today, it all fits. My guest today is Richard Shotton. His book, Hacking the Human Mind, the behavioral science secrets behind 17 of the world's best brands. Ladies and gentlemen, if you can't learn something from this conversation, if you can't learn something from Richard's book, you might not be able to learn. Without any further delay from me, let's jump right into my guest today, Richard Shotton. Something interesting that you did, and having done this podcast since 2012, hundreds of guests, as you note, a lot of interesting ones that you know a lot about. I would say 5 to 10% of guests have asked me in advance what topics we might cover or what kinds of questions. And you did. And you're the first person since starting this podcast in 2012 to ask the thought process behind that. I don't know what I've assumed about it. I've usually just said, well, I really don't have questions, but I've never asked anybody why they might think that could be useful. So the floor is yours.
It's a slightly strange situation, a podcast. It's not often you talk for a whole hour about what's your kind of forte. And I think sometimes knowing maybe the first few questions just lets you warm up a bit more naturally. So that was my thinking, but completely happy to go in cold as well.
I'm going to be cocky about this. I guess you could sometimes get on a podcast with somebody who might be somewhere on the spectrum, is reading from a sheet of questions, is not conversational, and then you I'm panicked.
That's the bigger risk, actually, where people have, here are the 10 questions and we are going to go through them in this order and we're not going to deviate. And then it feels like the world's worst job interview rather than an interesting podcast. So I think that's something to be avoided.
This gets into where we're going to go today on how consumers take in information or experiences and make decisions. But ultimately, I think I would tell all authors, anybody that wants to spread a message, usually if people see you as an interesting person, they see you as conversational, they feel the depth. It's like by the end, they're like, I'll go buy the book. Something like that. I think that's really true how things work. But I do think some authors will sometimes on a podcast, they will feel, perhaps because of PR, they'll feel I must say something about the book every 5 minutes or something. Sometimes feels a little artificial.
To me, that backfires because no one wants to be sold to aggressively. The best way to sell something, I think, is to just show people you are knowledgeable and useful and practical in terms of the field, and then they can join the dots themselves. I'm with you on that. That's always been my mantra.
It's the soft sell approach.
Obviously, in the end, I want to do that, but you've got to be confident in your material. And if they don't like the style, ramming the name of the book down their head isn't going to work. The key thing is they find it useful.
You've got a great title, though, so I got to give you that. So
yeah,
here's where I'm going to start today. A recent experience that I had. I'm currently in Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam, and I was in Singapore last week for a handful of days. And they've got a really nice, big, old Apple store on Orchard Road in Singapore. Very big. I'm sure it's one of the biggest in the world. Always packed. And I had no reason to buy any additional Apple gear because I have too much of it. But I still decided to go in there on some lark. And I saw a bunch of people sitting on couches being assisted by Apple Store employees with the Apple Vision Pro, which I've never even put on my head. And I just assumed because of wearing glasses, they're going to have to figure out the lens, and then maybe it's going to be too hard for me to demo it. All these things in my head, right? And I just stood there for a second, and somebody came up to me and they're like, oh, would you want to try it? I'm like, okay, but I've got these glasses on. How do you do that? And they're like, oh, give us your glasses. They got a whole machine over there. They do a close facsimile of your lenses, right? Then they put them in the Apple Vision Pro, and you sit down and somebody guides you through the experience of using this $5,000 device, which I had no expectation of using. The entire process it got a little delayed because there was some glitch for a few minutes, like 10 minutes. But otherwise, it was an amazing experience. And being such a long-time Apple user, I was quite surprised. And then by the end of it, I'm like, I had no intention of buying this product. I still didn't buy it, but after going through their 30-minute procedure, I was like, wow, not only was that the most incredible piece of tech that I've ever seen or used, their whole process of bringing me in was so unexpected for a very large company to bring you in a way like that. So I just thought it was a great, just to share with you, you're already thinking about how many different behavioral aspects took place to make that happen.
One of the first is an idea called reciprocity, that if someone does us a favor, we feel an obligation to return that favor. And that is a very deep-seated bias. Sometimes with these experiments in psychology, discoveries into kind of Western ways of thinking. But reciprocity is something that's been found essentially in every society across the world. Marcel Mauss was a ethnographer, and he did a wonderful book called The Gift, in which he argues if we are ever given something, we feel this deep obligation to return that favor. And I think that's at the heart of some of these product trials. Once a product spokesperson has been talking to you for 30 seconds, 5 minutes, there's a little bit of obligation on your part to try and return that favor. They've been very kind, they've given their time up. We can often feel a pressure to return that favor. I think that's one element going on, but many people might be very well aware of that. I know you've had Robert Cialdini on in the past. He talks about reciprocity as being one of his big 6 principles of human behavior. The other less well-known principle that might be going on is something called perceptual fluency. And it's essentially this argument that if we imagine using a product, there's a chance for us to get excited about it. And once we've had that kind of usage of it, even in our mind, we're more likely to desire and want the product. Now, that works on very tiny interventions. The famous study that looked into this was by Ryan Elder at Brigham Young University. He showed people pictures of cake. So I think it was a kind of Betty Crocker cake. There's a picture of a cake, and then he randomizes whether the spoon is on the left or the right. You then answer a few questions about how desirable this cake looks, how much you'd be prepared to pay, whether you'd want to eat it. And then he asks you, oh, are you left or right-handed? And essentially, he cuts the data by whether or not the spoon was in the natural position for your handedness. That's a word. So if you're right-handed, was the spoon on the right? That's the natural position. That's where you normally put the spoon, or the left. And what he finds is if the picture had the spoon in the position you'd normally put it due to your handedness, if it's in the right position, the natural position, you're about 35% more likely to want to buy this cake. Now, his argument is just these tiny little tweaks to messaging and copy and visuals. If you can make someone go through that process of imagining using the product, then you've got a chance to hook them in, then you've got a chance to get them excited. Now, Elder's study was on the most tiny of visual tweaks. What you've described is a far more in-depth approach from Apple. It should have an even bigger effect.
Let me share something about that too. I had no expectation. I had no imagination about anything. I mean, I'd seen some things, just people talking about it, and I knew it was going to be heavy on my head. Definitely heavy. Definitely did not want to wear it after 20 or 30 minutes. It's definitely not, the weight and the scope of it is not ready for prime time. But the technology, I'm sitting there, and I felt I was sitting on a rock, could not see anything to the left or the right of me that was not anything other than the rock. And in front of me was a T-Rex that was 2 inches from my face, drooling and breathing and seemingly about to lurch at me and eat me. And I tell you, if it did, I would have jumped. So the reason I bring all that up is because is there a behavioral insight to something that so surprises and shocks you and so amazing to where you're just like, there's no little things even going on. It's just, oh my God, if this thing that I've got on my head fit into the Ray-Bans that I'm currently wearing, the whole world would have this product right now.
For all the brands out there, I would argue, I think Apple are probably one of the masters of using behavioral science. I think it goes from the kind of ostentatious spends they put into the stores that build trustworthiness all the way through to the language they use in their ads. They are phenomenal communicators. And I think they're one of the brands that most consistently applies principles and behavioral science to get people to do what they want.
Is there an Apple issue that is near and dear to you that you like to bring up? Look, it's such a common brand that we all talk about. I never get bored of Apple. If I see a Steve Jobs clip, talking about something, I watch it. I just watch it because it's always brilliant.
You do it differently. I'm in Britain, so we normally just study one subject. I think often in America you have a couple, don't you? A major and a minor. And I think his minor was in psychology. So I don't think it's a coincidence that so much of their work draws on psychology and behavioral science. In terms of a technique that they use again and again, one of the most powerful, I think this is one that listeners can apply quite easily. It's the idea of concrete language. So there's this famous study back in 1972 by Ian Begg. So he's this brilliant psychologist at the University of Western Ontario. And gets some people in his lab, and one by one, he reads out this long list of 2-word phrases. So there are 22-word phrases. He reads them out, and then he asks people what they can remember. Now, half of the words he reads out are what he calls abstract phrases. So these are concepts, intangible things that you can't really visualize, like basic fact or impossible amount. The other half of the words he reads out are what he calls concrete phrases. So these are tangible objects or things that crucially you can visualize, like a square door or a white horse. And when Begg asked people to remember as much as they want, on average, people remembered 9% of the abstractions, but 36% of the concrete phrases. So you get this massive 4-fold variability in memory. People are much more likely to remember the concrete words. Now, Begg's argument is that vision's the most powerful of our senses. So if you use language people can visualize, it's very sticky. If you use language you can't visualize, it's very forgettable. Now go back to the classic Apple advertising. Think about, for example, when they launched the iPod. Now, just like every other MP3 out there, they wanted to communicate the benefit of memory and storage. Now, what most brands did, the Sonys and the Philips and the Motorola's, they talked about things like 212 or 512, whatever it was, megabytes of memory. Now, the problem with that is you can't picture a megabyte. You can't imagine 212. So that kind of messaging is completely forgettable. But now think about what Apple did. Exactly the same benefit that they wanted to convey of memory and storage, but they translated it into this very visualizable language. They talked about 1,000 songs in your pocket. And because you can picture a pocket, you can imagine a song, it is much, much stickier. I think one of the biggest lessons from Apple is not just communicating simply. I think that's not quite the point. It's communicating in a way that people can visualize. So don't talk about being high quality or trustworthy or premium. You know, those abstract concepts cannot be visualized. They're very forgettable. You've got to translate those abstract concepts into something people can visualize. So that's one of my favorite Apple principles.
Kind of a side tangent, as I think about a modern culture, I think about things like film, TV, music. I'm Gen X. I've got a bias, but I see younger people doing the same thing where seemingly we are all addicted, might not be the best word, but we all really appreciate, admire the music from the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, early 2000s maybe, and the films, especially from the 70s, 80s and whatnot. There seems to be something from a behavioral feeling. And if I think of something like one of my favorite films, The Godfather, such a simple title, you kind of get it pretty quick. It does feel like in the last 10 or 15 years, things became more complicated, or like EDM music or something. There is something to this where I think that we long for the experience that we can digest and we can appreciate versus something that is so complicated that you're just like, oh man.
Apple are brilliant at using this language that you can actually picture in your mind. That's one thing. On top of that, there's the point about simplicity. Academics aren't very well known for their humor, but there is one standout paper which has a brilliant title. So it's on this topic. It's Daniel Oppenheimer at Princeton. And the full title of the journal article is Consequences of Erudite Vernacular, Utilized Irrespective of Necessity. And then there's a colon. And then it's dangers of using long words needlessly.
That's nice. I like that.
It's a brilliant study. And it's super simple. He shows people these little traces of academic articles, these abstracts, and some of them have got lots of jargon in, unnecessarily complicated words. He shows those to people and they rate the intelligence of the author. Then he gets another group of people, shows them basically the same abstract, but replaces the complex words with simpler ones. Now, when that group rate the intelligence of the author, they come back with a score that's 13% higher. So Oppenheimer's argument is most people labor under an incorrect assumption about others. We often think if you want to impress people, let's talk in a highly convoluted, abstract, complex way. But what Oppenheimer says is that irritates the audience. They become confused. And then they don't blame the confusion on their own lack of understanding. They blame it on the communicator. So absolutely, you're right. There is a real power to simplicity when it comes to communications. If you speak in a complex way, it'll irritate your audience. They'll think worse of you. There's a strong rationale to try and communicate as simple as possible, even if you're talking to a very intelligent audience.
Yeah, I just had Richard Thaler on, and I noticed that immediately with him. You know, this guy's got a Nobel Prize. He's done all this work. He's respected by a lot of people, and his communication style was just so engaging.
Yes, what an impressive guest. He's brilliant at that. When he is trying to explain concepts, he'll often use everyday examples, like people not being able to stop themselves eating cashews, I think is one of his classic stories. And it is a real gift. It is very hard for experts to remember what it was like not to be an expert. So there's a study into this idea called the curse of knowledge. I always forget who it's by. It's either Elizabeth Norton or Elizabeth Dunn. And what she does is she gets pairs of people. And let's say we're a pair. You are the rapper and I'm the listener. You are given this list of, say, 10 nursery rhymes. You pick one of the nursery rhymes. You don't tell me what it is. And then on the table in front of you with your knuckles, you just beat out the tune. And then once you've done that, you're taken off and you're asked, what's the chance Richard correctly guesses the tune you were playing? And I think on average, people say, oh, it's probably 50-50 or 60-40 in favour of guessing. The researcher then comes to me and then says, what tune do you think Michael was playing? And generally people say, I haven't got a bloody clue. There's about 2% of people who accurately guess the tune. Because of course, when you are beating out this tune on the table, you've got Mary Has a Little Lamb, whatever it is you're playing, you've got the tune running along in your head. I don't hear that tune. All I hear is this kind of completely disconnected, random pattern of noise. Now, that argument that it is often called the curse of knowledge, it is very hard to forget what you already know, to start talking or to put a blog post together and think the audience has all your background knowledge. And it is a classic communications mistake of many academics. Now, Rich Thaler does not fall into it, but many academics are very hard to understand because they can't remember what it was like for us.
As I think about your world, and I want to go into some examples with other companies, but big picture, when I think about this concept, hacking the human mind, behavioral economics, behavioral science, is that this can be done, and of course, this could be someone's opinion, but this can be done for good and bad. One, for example, I was watching an interview or a brief piece of an interview with Bill Maher and the young lady who was in The Sopranos, who was with the character named Christopher. I forget her name. Dre De Matteo, I think. Anyways, she started talking about that she had financial problems. And she surprised Maher when she said that she had used OnlyFans. From the perspective of trying to have great societies and all this kind of stuff, I tend to think that all of us had a certain level. Okay, we can all be libertarian and everyone gets to do what they want to do, but if too many people are on OnlyFans not wearing their clothes, is society being kept together in such a nice way? Now, she was a really nice interview with Bill Maher and everything, and she said, look, it got me out of a hole and I was able to save my house and all that kind of stuff. But it is interesting where I've never logged into the website OnlyFans. I've never used it, but I know what it is. I just find it amazing that it has become so successful. And I would assume, and I don't know how much you know about it, but I would assume it is absolutely doing such a fantastic job, even though I might not appreciate where it goes. It's doing a fantastic job of hacking the human mind to get people to believe in it and use it. And I think it's one of the most efficient earners out there in terms of making money, really.
There's a piece in The Economist recently on it that it is one of the most efficient earners or scaled earners for the tax office in Britain as well. I think it's like saying like £200 million they pay in tax every year. So yeah, they're certainly doing something financially, debate the ethics or not. But your point that this field of behavioral science can be used for ill is absolutely true. I don't think we should shy away from that. Behavioral science is just the study of what effectively influences people. And you can use that for all sorts of aims. I wouldn't blame behavioral science there, though. Take another field. Think about something like rhetoric. You can use rhetoric, and many people have, you can use rhetoric to get people to hate their neighbors, or you can use rhetoric to get people to love each other. Now, there's a big spectrum from Martin Luther King to a tin pot dictator. You wouldn't blame the rhetorical skills, though. They're just a neutral tool. What makes behavioral science or rhetoric good or bad is the ends that you put it to. So I think you're right. This is a very fair challenge. Behavioral science isn't a get out of jail for free card. You've got to be using it for things that you think are for the benefit of society in general, or the benefit of your customers in general.
This is one where most people would probably agree that when it comes to food, if we walk into a 7-Eleven or a Circle K around the world, especially America, you're just going to see products in there that have been engineered from the labeling to the ingredients to everything to get people into. And look, I drink my fair share of Cokes every now and again, but at some stage, wow, the ability to hack the human mind, it's tricky.
The answer to me would be that these ideas are out there. People will be using them to sell to you. But let's say, take the area of food and diet. If you are really keen on getting people to eat more healthily, you should use these principles to encourage healthy eating. Don't just let fast food companies use them.
The counterbalance, the counterweight to the fast food companies.
Exactly.
And we don't, as a society, really do that too well.
No. And in fact, the way that many healthy foods communicate is the exact opposite of what behavioral scientists would suggest. So, for example, there are studies run by the Behavioural Insights team. So it's a big kind of quasi-governmental behavioural science unit in Britain. And I think it's the World Research Institute. They randomised menus in a restaurant, and they want to see how can we encourage people to order the healthy vegetable breakfast. If you labelled it as meat-free, hardly anyone wanted to buy it. If you labelled it feel grown, a 50 or 60% improvement in sales. This idea that you should focus on appeal over duty is something that every commercial advertiser knows. Soft drinks, chips, crisps, they will always be focusing on the taste. But for some reason, when we start trying to get people to eat more vegetables or eat more healthily, we focus often on health messaging or environmental messaging. But study after study suggests that doesn't work very well. Much better to be focused on the fact that a field-grown breakfast, something that emphasizes its lovely, juicy, tasty ingredients.
It doesn't beat bacon. Come on. There's no behavioral science out there that can defeat bacon. It's impossible.
Bacon has many advantages. But the point being is these real-world tests show, not saying it's going to jump to the first pick on the menu, but you see this significant improvement in the volume that will go for these vegetable-based dishes. So you can't say to everyone to change, but you can certainly make it more likely people will pick your healthy food.
I'll go back to an example that I brought up a few minutes ago with the Apple Vision Pro. While I was going through their examples, I think it'd be obvious to anybody, it'd be the most fantastic way to watch a movie. There's nothing that I've ever seen that can come close to if you could watch a movie with that technology. I don't even think the content even exists wide scale for that particular technology. But as I was trying on these things, I was thinking to myself, oh my gosh, if they release the Apple Vision Pro with the requisite pornography to teenage and 20-something men, I could see addiction that would dwarf anything it's ever. Have you put this thing on yet?
I haven't had the Apple one. I've tried other people's kind of VR headsets.
Find yourself into an Apple store and just go through the experience, just like I described it. Again, it gets to your point, like that doesn't mean that Apple is doing something wrong by creating this great tech. There's that other side where there has to be some personal restraint, even if you're presented with this fantastic behavioral message of, hey, no girlfriends needed anymore. You still have to work through that yourself. It's a fascinating area that you're in the middle of because there are so many pros and cons.
The point with the ethics of using these techniques, in fact, you mentioned Richard Thaler earlier. He wrote an amazing book probably 15 years ago, Nudge, Cass Sunstein, and they debate the ethics of behavioral science in the early chapters. And the bit that always stuck with me was they discuss an American philosopher called John Rawls, and he came up with the idea of I think it's called the publicity principle, which is essentially think about your using these biases, and if you are using these experiments to manipulate people, and you would be embarrassed if that news was to appear on the front page of your local newspaper. That's a pretty good sign that you're using the wrong way. If you wouldn't be embarrassed, continue doing it. And I've always thought that's a useful guide to what is that ethical line when applying behavioral science.
Let me go into some examples that you bring up. And one, I don't know that I've ever tried it. This Starbucks pumpkin spice latte thing. I really don't think I've ever tried it that I can recall. And I do observe from afar people getting excited about it and talking about it almost in the same nostalgic way of, oh, Easter is coming, Christmas is coming, which is fascinating to me that they've created that lore amongst people. Now, it hasn't worked on me. Maybe I've talked to too many guys like you, so I've got my eyes up. But speak to why, for example, this was such an important brand and particular product that you wanted to dive into it.
We have a full chapter on the pumpkin spice latte because it is a phenomenon. Billions of these things sold.
And what's the time period of when it's sold? There's certain months?
Across autumn. So in Britain, they are coming out now and they'll be available for couple of months till the end of the year.
It's a couple months every year. That's the deal.
Yes.
So that's what people have been imprinted by that.
Yes. That is quite different from virtually every other brand. What most brands will do is they will introduce a very popular menu to their item. They'll think, amazing, let's just keep this on the menu forever and hopefully we'll maximize sales. What Starbucks did was a far cleverer long-term intervention. They put it on their menu early September, and it then runs for a couple of months, and then they remove it from the menu. You cannot get it. There's a couple of things going on here. The first is this idea, which is a key behavioral science principle of scarcity. It's essentially the argument that we want what we can't have. If something is in limited supply, either in terms of time or volume, it becomes more desirable. Now, that's not speculation. There's a 1975 study backed by Stephen Wirtschel, one of the earliest studies into this. He was at the University of Virginia. And what he shows, he gets a group of people together and he brings in this glass jar of cookies. And for some people, they are seeing this glass jar full to the brim, 10 cookies. And they rate the cookie and they give it a score out of 10. He then gets a completely fresh group of people. He brings them the same cookies from the same batch, but this time there are only 2 cookies in the glass jar. Now, even though people are eating exactly the same physical item, it's come from the same batch of cookies, their ratings of the quality of this cooking, their willingness to pay jumps by 20-30%. So Wirtschel's argument is if we think something is in scarce supply, it becomes more precious in our eyes, and that belief becomes self-fulfilling. So that's the first thing Starbucks are doing. They're creating this desire by not letting you have as much of this item as they want.
It stays in your mind more.
Go back through an evolutionary angle, and it was probably a very good survival tactic to be focusing on items that weren't going to be there tomorrow or the day after. This is something that's hardwired within us. And then I think the second benefit is this idea of habituation, that over time, if we can constantly sate our desires, we enjoy a product less and less. So what Starbucks do very well is by removing the products after only a couple of months, is they stop this process of habituation fully occurring. Your first pumpkin spice latte of the year will be amazing. If you were allowed to get to the 20th or the 30th, that kind of sickly sweet taste would probably wane in its appeal. So by stopping this process of habituation and allowing people this chance to reset and refresh, they end up sustaining the desirability for far longer. So I think that's the 2 big things that Starbucks are doing.
Let me share 2 examples back that are in that same headspace that have happened to me recently. There's a company out there called Kiehl's that makes like skincare products in the airports and stuff. And I'm not a consumer of their products, but it's somewhere along the line because deodorant is a rare thing in Asia. There's a whole discussion about that, but it's a rare thing in Asia just because people don't have the same body odor issues as us European-based folks. But Kiehl's had a deodorant that I just tried once and it was great. And then it was gone. And then it reappeared 6 months later. And then it's gone again. I'm like, what the hell? Why can't you just have a product like that? I don't want to be in a scarcity mindset. But still, it seems to be scarce. And maybe it'll reappear, maybe it won't. I don't know. It doesn't make me hate the product. It makes me want the damn product, but I can't get it. And so I feel myself constantly thinking about, damn, I don't want to have to use another product. I want that product, but I can't get that product. But I'm still not developing a negative feeling towards the product because the product was so damn good.
If you sent out a survey to 100 Keels customers or put them down in a focus group and said, look, would you like products you're discussing, that particular joke, to be available all year round or only available for a couple of months in the year? Virtually everyone would say, I always want it to be available. And one of the big problems with marketing is too many marketers directly question customers and then take those answers at face value. And if there's a broad thing from behavioral science, it's that be very careful about listening to what customers say, because what people say they want and what will actually change their behavior, they are wildly different things. There's an amazing psychologist called Timothy Wilson at the University of Virginia, and one of the titles of his books sums up his theories very well. It's called Strangers to Ourselves. And his idea is people don't have full introspective insight into their own motivations. So if you put them on the spot in a survey or on a focus group, they'll give you loads of answers, but most of them will be misleading. If you really want to understand what changes behavior, what you need to do is set up very simple test and control experiments. That is a much, much better guide.
A/B testing.
Yeah, essentially A/B testing, but often what digital marketers think about when they do A/B testing is testing the final end creative. And that's quite useful, but that end creative will probably be irrelevant in a couple of months. It won't be timed any longer. What I would suggest is you take that same principle of A/B testing your final creative and use it to test the underlying drivers of behavior. So find out whether scarcity or social proof or concreteness works for your audience. And once you know if that underlying behavioral science principle works, well, that is a timeless, eternal truth. And then you use A/B testing to work out, well, what's the best way to express these underlying principles?
You're making me realize how much this is weighing down on my normal life. As I told you, I was in Singapore last week, and I was in a Lululemon store. For me, it's the best fitness gear you can wear. If you sweat a lot or whatnot, or you work out a lot, it's great. And I wanted some compression shorts, essentially, that you wear close to the skin on your legs. And they had one pair in my size and one color. And the lady was like, yes, this is the biggest store in Southeast Asia. So here I am in Singapore, where it's probably the wealthiest per capita country in the world. I'm in the store that they declare is the biggest in Southeast Asia. And they have one pair, one size that I want, and one color. Of course, I grab it because, there's only one. But you're like, I would have bought 5 because I know how you go through these kinds of things. So I'm realizing as I talk to you, for several products in my life, I'm in a constant state of always having to think about, I'm going to need another one, but I don't have access to it right now. But I'm going to need the damn thing. Where is it going to come from? I'm realizing that your world is coming down on me now for this kind of stuff.
Yeah, the other kind of more extreme expression of this idea that you might see some brands doing, and I think this is quite common in America, we don't see it much in the UK, is purchase limit scarcity. So you go into a store, let's say you see some Lululemon leggings, or you're in the supermarket and you see some tins of soup. Purchase limit scarcity is when you don't let people take as much of the products they want. So on the soup, you might say maximum purchase 6 cans. And what that tends to do is very effectively apply this principle of scarcity, because what people assume is if the retailer won't let me take as much as I want, either they are worried this product's going to sell out and they might think that's going to irritate other customers. So it's a very strong indication this product is popular, or the deal's very good that it'll be popular. Or people think, why wouldn't the retailer let me take as much as I want? This deal must be so steep, it's actually a loss leader. So one of the paradoxical ways to sell more is often not to let people buy as much as they want. So if you own a shop, next time you're putting something on discount, add a little shelf wobbler that says maximum 4 or 5 or 6 cans. It's a really simple, costless way of boosting sales.
Let me go into an example that's close to where I grew up. I grew up 15 miles outside Washington, D.C. Used to go to Ocean City, Maryland. And I remember as a kid, I would go to Redskins games, the football team, similar to what you talk about in your book as the example. You talk about this at the boardwalk, these massive buckets of fries. And when I would go to these Washington Redskins games, you'd get these massive buckets of fries that they would just cover in malt vinegar. And it was the best damn thing. And maybe it exists again somewhere, but it was such a great thing, such a great experience. The fry thing, and I'm going to let you go into it, the fry example, obviously, and I recall some of their early branches because they were right where I was living at that time, was the Five Guys. And the Five Guys founders were motivated, inspired by seeing a big bucket of fries and people wanting just a big bucket of fries. And it seems so simple. And we can all think about if you walk into a McDonald's, which we probably all still might do, even if there is a Five Guys. But they took it to that burger and fries, like it's the little diners kind of thing, that kind of experience. And I think there's also a nostalgia with Five Guys too. But why don't I let you go into some of that early thought process they had into why they took the chances they did and what was inspiring them about these big buckets of fries.
Jerry Murrell and his sons they decided they're going to set up a burger shop, and they are wandering around looking at kind of other potential competitors. And one of the shops they see is something called Thrasher's, and it has this massive queue of people outside it. And they wonder, why is it, when it's surrounded by other burger joints, why is this one so popular? And the key thing about Thrasher's is that it only sells chips. It doesn't sell anything else. You get chips.
You have to translate yourself, though. Not everybody's from the UK.
Oh, sorry, fries. Yeah, I called them chips. That's fries. Yeah, for you guys. Basically, they just sell fries. Now, they specialize in selling fries, and they have 1 or 2 toppings. That's all you can get. And Murrell thinks to himself, maybe it's this specialization that makes them so appealing. So when he sets up Five Guys, they have a very limited menu. They don't have vegan burgers or chicken burgers. They are focused solely on hamburgers. And that is tapping into a very powerful behavioral science principle called the goal dilution effect. So the original academics I think it was Zhang and Fishback, at University of Chicago. They do a study back in 2007, and they get a group of people. They randomize them into 2 subgroups, and some people are told about the health benefits of jogging. That's really good for your heart health. And then that group rate how good they think jogging is for heart health. Next group of people, they see exactly the same argument about jogging and heart health, but then there is another paragraph which says jogging is really good for your bone density. Now, when people are then asked how good they think jogging is for their heart health, they see a very interesting pattern. They see, even though it's the same argument, a lower score. There is lower believability in how good jogging is for your heart health. And they call this the goal dilution effect. They argue that if you keep on giving people extra reasons to believe in a behavior or a product, they have a diluting effect. Essentially, people have a rule of thumb in their head that we can't be masters of all trades. People tend not to be amazing, gymnasts and tennis players. We have this belief that if a product offers lots of different types of things, it will tend to be slightly worse at that underlying reason. So Murrell was spot on. And I think this is one of the reasons why Five Guys had such early success. You specialize in a very particular type of cuisine. And not only do you have all the kind of logical benefits of that, you learn quicker, you also have a psychological benefit, which is people assume that you are going to be very good at your product, and they're more likely to go and try it, more likely to buy it.
It's interesting you bring up this idea of expertise. So here I get started with these books on a very particular investment strategy. And then around 2012, I decided to start a podcast. And most of the guests were trading associates in my world. But after a little while, I wasn't not bored, but I felt like I wanted more. It was kind of like repetitive. I had met and I'd interviewed earlier a guy named Vernon Smith, who won a Nobel Prize, shared it with Danny Kahneman the year that he won. And so I had Vernon come on the podcast. And then that was how I got Daniel Kahneman to come on, which was through sending him the link to the Vernon Smith interview. And then he came on. And I think it was, for me, it was such a fortuitous thing because honestly, I probably wouldn't be talking to you today if I didn't talk to Kahneman back in, I think, 2014, because the moment I talked to him, everybody would talk to me. Now, here's the interesting thing. I like to think of myself as an all-around interesting person to talk to, and I can talk to anybody. But, there's a lot of people who would say they never got past the books. They love the books, but they'll say, oh no, the pivot you made didn't work. Talking to Richard today in 2025. But for me, I can see how if you start with something very defined, it can be tricky because that wasn't necessarily the perfect marketing move by me or the perfect business move. It was literally pure curiosity. Podcaster taking off. I've got an opportunity to talk to Daniel Kahneman. I'm going to talk to Daniel Kahneman. It wasn't that I was thinking, because there is some tangential connection to my world and his work too, for sure. It's interesting how people think, and they can slot you, right? And then you might not get out of the slot.
Absolutely. And what these biases tell you about these experiments is people's reaction. If you are an expert in finance and you suddenly want to develop a complementary business that's about advice on gardening, just be aware that even if objectively your financial knowledge doesn't decrease, by communicating this area of strength in gardening as well, people will believe you're more of a generalist and they will become slightly more skeptical. So it's not to say don't necessarily do it, but it's to say, look, just be aware that there will be this unintended consequence. Now, when it comes to your very specific situation of going from books to podcasting, maybe the other implication of the experiment from Zhang and Fishback is try and link these two different media back to your single specialist skill.
They do in many ways. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the experiments, they set up some of the challenges, and then I think they hint at ways of either getting around them or counterbalancing measures.
And this is something that you may or may not have experience with yet as an author, but I think I sell more audiobooks. I mean, audiobooks sell like crazy. So it is this kind of merging of book and audio, and now it's delivered in audiobook format, and people love audiobooks.
I would position myself as an expert on the application of behavioral science in marketing. And if I then say I will let you access that in audiobook and print copy, the specialism is still the specialism. It's just the medium of access that changes. So I think that kind of avoids this goal dilution effect. The real problem was if I tried to say I'm an expert in behavioral science and marketing and finance, then it starts setting off people's alarm bells.
I've got an example that I want to go back in time on. It's a touch controversial. It is in grad school, having the opportunity to go to an event being hosted by the founders of Ben & Jerry's. So I'm in my early 20s, and that brand was huge already. I liked the brand at the time. I ate that stuff for sure, 100%. I was at Georgetown University is where it was at. And I show up, and look, I am what I am, and I'm not on the same political spectrum as Ben & Jerry. And they are really progressive. And instead of it being an interesting conversation about their brand, which was obviously fabulous, and their products, which are obviously fabulous, it became something where it was like, I'm in the wrong room. I don't want to be around these people. I don't want to be around the students. I don't want to be around Ben & Jerry. I don't want to be around any of this. I don't think I ever ate the damn ice cream again. And so what's interesting about that is if we look at the modern world, if anybody just scratches a little bit, you can say to yourself, I kind of know the politics of Apple or the politics of Google or the politics of Facebook, but I use all their products. But I never ate Ben & Jerry's again because I think it was so extreme, where I think this is an interesting thing is, and I worry about this myself sometimes too. If I say something that is too extreme, I will tick people off who like my trading material, like my books, but they say that guy's politics might be something different than mine, and now I don't like him.
There's an interesting kind of variance maybe between Ben & Jerry's and Google and Facebook in that there's this continuum of maybe political engagement. Ben & Jerry's are probably right at that extreme where they wear their progressive liberal beliefs on their heart. Others where it's, much for Facebook, they have views, but it's not integral to the brand.
It doesn't cause either side to stop using their product.
Yeah, vast majority of brands are more like in our kind of categorization, the Googles and the Facebook than the Ben & Jerry's. Yeah.
With shareholders, you have to be. You can't necessarily start ticking off half the audience either way.
Because marketers, the kind of phrase they use is purpose, that we should have this ethical discussion in our advertising. We should talk about our ethics. And I think it's a problem of relying on claimed data. If you stop someone in the street and say, why did you buy your last beer or why did you buy your last cat food? They will talk about, I don't know, the taste, or it was quite good value. Maybe not completely the truth, but reasonable reasons they might buy. But then think about what a lot of brands do. They'll say to you, is the ethics of the cat food brand important when you're purchasing? Now suddenly you've raised this spectre of ethics, and who wouldn't say no? You'll feel like an evil person not to say that's important. But of course, when people get to the actual shopping aisle where they're choosing their cat food, they don't think about the ethics. They think about what will go down well with the cat. Have they seen this brand on TV? So I think it's often a misuse of research that makes people think that they have to go and pronounce on politics and ethics. Maybe that's something the company should do in the dark. I don't think it's really often the right content for their TV ads or their radio ads or their internet ads.
And to build on that, if I think about something that's not necessarily political, for example, I grew up with Sports Illustrated swimsuit issues coming out once a year in the 80s, and these covers featured women at about 50 kg, pretty petite, thin, slender women. If you roll forward until the 2020, until now, we got to a situation where instead of that image, we were now promoting an image. Often I would see an image of somebody who was clearly, I mean, by any known definition in my lifetime, was obese. And then you've got that this is fitness. And this was fascinating to me because it felt, wow, I'm surprised that some of these brands are taking these sides, because if you think of yourself as a fitness person, then all of a sudden a brand starts saying, well, over here, which is not fitness, is fitness. It's fascinating that some of these large brands, and not the ones that you've talked about, obviously the ones that you talk about in your book, and people have to go read about those, but it is fascinating that some brands out there, and Bud Light was a great example of this, have chosen these controversial directions when there's a hell of a lot of risk.
We're in a polarized time. If you fundamentally believe as a brand the Republican or the Democrat Party is utterly crucial to life, and this is something that runs through every iota of a being, you will accept that you might lose sales from half the country because that's who you are. But most businesses, they don't genuinely have that belief. So I think the danger often comes when you masquerade. You pretend you're super interested in one of these causes, you then lose a lot of sales, and then you retreat. And then you've annoyed both ends. You've annoyed the people who believe in the cause because you showed that you are fickle, and you've annoyed the people who strongly disagree with the cause.
Back to the drawing board and picking up, like going to hacking the human mind and figuring out how do we dig out of this hole that we put ourselves in unnecessarily.
Go with your eyes wide open. If there's an ethical issue that is super important to you, then you should accept you'll lose sales and do it anyway. The problem comes when people are painting this veneer of morality on their products. I think that's where it goes wrong.
You know, I'm not going to go into them all. It'd be unfair. You go into a lot in your book, from Red Bull to Guinness to Liquid Death to Dyson to Facebook, Snickers, Amazon Prime, Kraft mac and cheese. People are going to have to go dig in, and I could have walked you through them all. That's a little unfair. I'd steal all the work and put it on my podcast. But I think people can get a feel for you and the depth that you've gone at. You know, what's really interesting too is all the academic work that goes behind these interesting brands and the interesting choices they've made. It's quite fascinating. We want to think sometimes maybe, oh, that brand over, there was just one smart guy there. Come on, don't assume that. There's a lot of stuff going behind. As we pointed out today, there could be a simple little product, burger and fries. There's a lot behind that.
There's a lot of money riding at stake. People often will immerse themselves in all these experiments just to get that 1 or 2% advantage over their competition.
The book, Hacking the Human Mind, Behavioral Science Secrets Behind 17 of the World's Best Brands. Richard, where can we send people? Where would you like to direct them to? They'll be able to find the book on all whatever places. If they can't find the book, something's wrong with them.
Absolutely.
Which is possible. But where would you like to direct people to?
I'm quite prolific on LinkedIn and X, what was Twitter, and never posting about my personal life. It's always about how you can take findings from behavioral science and apply them to your marketing and communication. So at Shotton on X, and then Richard Shotton on LinkedIn.
I appreciate it, sir.
Fantastic. Very nice to chat. Thanks a lot, Michael.
I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash, or just trying to make a lot of money. Trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.